Okay everyone, today we're going to go ahead and tie up a fun damselfly nymph. This only uses a few patterns, yet is very effective for a wide variety of species, including trout and many panfish and even some bass. So for it, we're going to be using just a standard streamer hook. This is a size 8 Daiichi 2220. But you can really use just any 3 or 4x long streamer hook in a multitude of different sizes. We're also going to be using some marabou. Now I have some fun damsel nymph olive marabou, but you can really use any color marabou that you would like. For the head of our fly, this is purely optional, but I like to put on a little bit of like an ice dub or a prism dub, something that's got a little bit of flash to it. You could also substitute like an S-Taz or some other type of flashy chenille if you would like, instead of having to use the dubbing. Again, purely optional, but I think it makes the fly a little bit more effective. We're also going to be using some bead chain eye in order to weight down our fly. Of course, you could use a cone head or even just some wire. The idea is to add some weight to allow this fly to really sink below the surface. And finally, just to add a bit of strength, we are going to go ahead and use some medium or small wire. In this case, I'm using copper wire, which I think happens to go really well, that color, against our marabou. And the last thing that I'll mention, and it's always purely optional, but I think it really helps with any type of dumbbell eye or bead chain eye, is a little bit of super glue. And I really like using like an ultra gel style super glue, just because it allows us a little bit extra time when we're setting those eyes in place. Okay, so let's get down to it. Oh, I forgot one more material, and that's going to be your thread. I like, for this fly, a UTC 140, simply because it's a little bit stronger and works very well when we go to tighten down those eyes. But you can really use a lighter like a 3/0 or a 70 if you'd like. In addition, I'm using like an olive green. I'm just trying to match that dubbing that we're going to be using toward the head of our fly. But again, you can use a wide variety of colors or even just white if that's all you have. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to lay down our thread base, working from the front, heading all the way towards our natural tie-in point for our fly. I just like to lay down a good thread base before I get started. Just open spiral back up to where I'm going to set in those bead chain eyes. And this is going to be more of a front heavy fly. So rather than a clouser minnow, which is usually set back about 1/3 of the way on the hook shank, and you kind of divide that hook shank from where that barb is up to the very front, we're instead going to be tying much closer to the actual eye of the hook. And the way I always explain this is if you take whatever eyes you're going to be using, in this case bead chain, and you set them right behind the eye, and you go back one more length, that's typically where I like to place my eyes. So it's actually one, dumbbell eye or bead chain eye length back, or width back. And that's right about at this point. So once you have that point identified on your hook, go ahead and create a thread dam. So we're just going to wind the thread around until we've created a little bit of a bump, and that gives us something to lock these eyes against. Now, like I said, I like to use a little bit of super glue, so I'm just going to put a little drop right where we're going to tie our dumbbell eye in, or our bead chain eye. And then what I like to do is I actually like to capture around that bead chain first and allow that to come right down onto the hook. That makes it a lot easier to get these eyes lined up and place exactly where I want. So now what we're going to do is a series of diagonal wraps. 2 wraps, 3 wraps, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's going to result in your eyes being slanted. That's actually okay, because now we're going to come around the other direction, and we're going to start with tension. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Careful not to break your thread. 7, 8, 9, 10. Now usually when I do this, I'll actually twist the eyes as I lay in the wraps. So by putting some tension, that really helps those dumbbell eyes or bead chain eyes come back into place until they're nice and straight. So once we have that done, what we're going to do is come underneath both sides. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And after doing that, these eyes are now locked in place. They're really not going to go anywhere. And it's as simple as that. Now the eyes are on nice and straight, perpendicular to the hook, and locked in place. They're not going to spin on us. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and bring our thread back to our natural tie-in point. Again, that's right around where that barb, that hook would be. We've crushed our barb, and that's typically where we're going to tie in all of our tail materials for many different types of patterns. But before we put in our marabou, we're going to go ahead and tie in a length of that wire. I like to have maybe a 3-inch length of wire. So I'm going to place this wire right up along the top of this hook. This just adds more weight to what is eventually going to be the underside of our fly, because our bead chain is going to invert this fly. We're just going to add the weight to help it invert that much more and really keep that hook point off the bottom. So it's now tied in place, and I'm going to go ahead and just allow that wire to hang where it is. Now we're ready for our marabou. Now, we've worked with marabou before, and it's pretty unruly, right? A little bit of movement, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. So the best way to manage this is just wet your fingers. Or I've even heard people talk about just having a damp sponge on, or a wet paper towel on their desk. Just something to wet down these fibers, and they're going to suddenly be a lot more manageable. Now our idea is to have them about the same length as our hook shank. So that's about as the length that I want. Now I've got a lot more material here. We're not going to cut that off. We're going to use that here in just a minute. So having a nice long piece of marabou is actually very helpful for this fly. So once we have our length, we're going to bring that back to that tie-in point where our thread is. Place it down, and then I like to switch. So I was using my right hand, I'm going to switch over to my left hand. That allows me to keep the length of my tail, but also be able to easily tie it in. And I'm doing a series of about 3 wraps, kind of loose. And that should allow me to see how that tail's sitting. If I had to make an adjustment now, I could. Make sure it's sitting in place. And now I'm going to go ahead and put in another couple of wraps. Again, pulling on the up versus the down, keeping that marabou from really twisting around on me. So I still have a pretty healthy chunk of marabou hanging off towards the front of my fly. And that's great because we are going to use this to end up palmering or wrapping around the shank of our fly to make the main body of this fly. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to start twisting. We're going to be careful because marabou can be delicate. We're just going to put in a couple of twists. And what that should allow us to do, I'm going to advance my thread up to just behind the bead chain. is we should just be able to wrap that right around. I like to make sure that first wrap, pull back a little bit to really cover that thread. And remember which way we're wrapping. So I'm coming over top this hook towards the camera, you, but it's actually away from me. I'm going to put another twist in just to make sure. And I'm going to wrap it right up against, right tight behind those bead chain eyes. So I'm putting that thread behind, in front, behind, in front. So what do I mean by that? I'm making sure that my thread goes behind the material. So where now the thread is towards the back of the hook, my material is towards the eye. That's what I mean by behind. And then in front is the opposite. The material's heading towards the back, my thread is heading towards the eye. That puts those crisscrosses in and really locks this material in place. So I'm going to go ahead and cut off my excess now. I always push my thread out of my way with my finger so that I don't cut it. And now we have the body of our fly. Now to make this fly stronger, that's where our wire comes in place. So we want to put in counter wraps. So counter wrapping means whatever direction that we wrap the body material, we want to wrap the opposite direction so that we put in crisscrosses. So if you remember, I went up and towards the camera away from myself. Now I'm going to go down and then up. And I'm going to use an open spiral. I'm not going to do this too tightly wound together. You know, I'm seeing maybe 1/8 of an inch in between each wrap. And I'm going to wrap that all the way forward, right up behind that bead chain eye. And I'm going to kind of let it cross in front so that I can capture it. 1, 2, 3 wraps. And I'll even come up in front of the eyes a little bit too. So at this point, you can go ahead and break the wire off. I use my D-barb pliers. I'm not going to damage my scissors. Makes it easy to cut it. And then just kind of pinch that wire back down in place. And I'm going to clean this up. Just with a couple of wraps. That wire is nice and secure, isn't going to come undone. And I'm going to bring my thread right back behind those bead chain eyes again. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to add on our dubbing. So just a small pinch. You don't need a lot. This is more than I actually need, so I'm going to take half of this. In general, when you pull out a pinch of dubbing, you're always going to have more than what you need. And I'm going to go ahead and make a dubbing noodle around this thread. Now, to do this, some people will use wax. I simply wet my thread to help this dubbing material stick. And this is like an ice dubbing. It's a little bit harder to work with than your normal dry fly variant. So you just kind of lay it on top, and then you're going to start twisting your fingers in a direction. I find if you wet your fingers, that'll help form a tighter dubbing noodle. That's what we call this, right? So once you have that dubbing noodle in place, go ahead and put a wrap behind. And then bring it forward. And you notice how I'm periodically stopping? And that's to make sure that I continue to kind of dub tightly, just so this material gets wrapped into place. So I did a crisscross. I went over, under, and back and over, really filling in that gap, and then coming back underneath, up to the front. Now I've run out of dubbing, so I'm going to take just a very, very small amount and dub a little bit more on. Again, just wet my thread, work that dubbing noodle in place, I'm going to wrap that. Pull that a little tight. Wrap that up. And there we go. So now all I want to do, just going to clean it up just a bit. And I can use my whip finish. And I'm going to put 2 whips on. This fly is going to see a lot of hits. So I like it nice and strong. You can even secure this with a little bit of head cement if you want, but I think it's fine as it is. And I'm just going to cut my thread off. So that's our damselfly nymph. Now I like to tease out the fibers a little bit more with, this is just an old toothbrush. You can use Velcro. A lot of people will use just a piece of Velcro tied to or glued to a stick. And I like to work the entire body of this fly, the marabou and this dubbing, and really brush it out, really tease those fibers out, make it nice and buggy. And then I'm going to start drawing these dubbing fibers backwards. This is where an estaz can be really nice because, you know, it's going to be buggier, it's going to pull back very nicely. But I still like using the ice dub. I just think it's a little less bulky than an estaz, but no reason why you can't, especially if you tied this larger, then an estaz would probably work even better. And that's it. You can see here the fly will invert in the water, looks something like this. Very, very effective pattern, very simple pattern, easy to fill a box with these and go out and target a number of different species. So hope you give it a try and let me know how it goes.